Zionism. Take a minute, notice what feelings come up for you when I say that word. How are you impacted by the word Zionism? How do you understand it and relate to it as an idea? Do you envision the heroic efforts of our ancestors, struggling to bring forth a sovereign Jewish state from the swamp and the desert? Do you bristle with some amount of discomfort at the current state of Israel and the war in Gaza? Have you detached completely, choosing to simply focus instead on other parts of life? Do questions flood your mind, wondering, what should I think or feel? Or even, what does Israel have to do with me? In this moment of Jewish history, how you relate to Zionism is as crucial as it has ever been. What does it truly mean to be a Zionist? Do we know enough of our own history to embrace this project of our parents and grandparents and to carry it through to the next generation? Are we confident we can even define Zionism amidst the confusion, the endless pressures, half-truths, disinformation, propaganda, and hatred? And can we remain connected to our Zionism even as we recognize that Israel is not beyond reproach and needs and deserves our ongoing influence? The global Jewish community and the state of Israel have been in a pressure cooker of fear and uncertainty, especially since the attacks of October 7th. And if the lessons of history teach us anything, they teach us that as Zionists, we had better understand where we come from if we have any hope of influencing where we are going. There was a time when the entire world was caught up in a Zionist enterprise. And today, those relationships are fractured, frayed. While many Jewish communities feel stronger than ever about their commitment to Israel, the larger world criticizes and scrutinizes in ways that no other country in the world is subject to. And as anti-Semitic trends continue to surge in our country and around the world, it is anti-Zionism which carries the torch for Jew haters of the world today. An entire generation of young Americans might not even recognize the world of the past, the world which necessitated the emergence of Zionism and eventually the state of Israel itself. Well, tonight is Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish New Year, and there is no subject more vital, perhaps misunderstood, and yet relevant to our celebration than our own understanding of Zionism in our relationship to the Jewish state. For Israel is not just a faraway homeland for Jews who identify with the Zionist project. It is a place that reminds us all of who we are and carries the spiritual weight of the Jewish people across the centuries. As a progressive liberal congregation, we feel especially connected in these days to the thriving Reform communities in Israel, which are now stronger than ever. Our efforts to support democratic values in Israel have borne real fruit in recent years. And the current war in Gaza has shown us just how important these efforts are as Netanyahu's government seeks to reject our counsel and reverse our progress. The protests in the streets of Israel, which continue to expand and strengthen, they are largely driven by those who identify themselves as religiously liberal Zionists. Those who are most committed to the progressive impulses that we in the Reform movement share, bringing home the hostages, ensuring peace and prosperity for Jews as well as for Palestinians and all of Israel's neighbors. And yet we are living through a time of intense pressure to abandon our allegiance to Israel and to engage with forces here in the West who would co-opt this word, Zionism, for its own purposes. The banners and signs that we see every day, they corrupt and they manipulate that term, and they do tremendous dishonor to those who fought hard so that Jews might have a place in this world. It is our family who is suffering in Israel, brothers and sisters, our cousins. It is our community which is under attack. The terrorists who crossed the security fence on October 7th did not scream two-state solution or free Palestine on their way to a music festival, murdering, raping, pillaging in village after village. What they screamed was kill the Jews, all the Jews. In order to understand what Zionism is and what it stands for, it is necessary that we peel back a layer and realize that the various ways this term is used today are based on often competing or inaccurate historical narratives. It is critical that we understand what's at stake. So first, I want to talk about what Zionism is not. Zionism is not colonialism. To argue that Israel represents European efforts to colonize and upend the indigenous Palestinians living there is just the current version of a very old, very false claim. Many don't know the history and claim that Jews never lived in the land, never worshiped at the temple in Jerusalem, and have no ancestral claim to the land. It is a dangerous and inherently anti-Semitic idea, and it flies in the face of reason. Just look to our sacred texts. Not to mention the sacred text of every other major world religion that mentions Israel and the Jewish people. Our history is in Israel. Our liturgy is replete with the longing for return, and every page of Torah is infused with the covenant that God made with Abraham and Sarah to bring us to the promised land. How many of us here tonight have a pair of candlesticks at home, a kippah or a challah cover with the skyline of Jerusalem outlined upon them? How many times have we prayed the Shabbat prayers together, or heard the 7 wedding blessings, or offered Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, or attended a Passover Seder, and considered the specific references to Zion and Jerusalem interwoven through them all? It would be impossible to imagine a Judaism without this idea of Israel embedded into every aspect of our religion and our peoplehood. This is why we light a third candle on the bima every Shabbat, and why we drape a chair in the Israeli flag. Because we feel pain and loss acutely with our Israeli family as we await the return of the remaining hostages. We ache to think of another Rosh Hashanah that the hostages are still not home. The settler colonialist accusation rejects history, willingly turning a blind eye to our narrative and our culture. Zionism is not apartheid. For too long, we have watched as the world has debated this false comparison between the racist policies of apartheid South Africa and Israel with respect to the Palestinians, when in fact, 20% of Israeli society are Arabs who serve at every level of Israeli government and military, in every field and occupation, are governed by their own political parties, not to mention being subject to the very same laws as every other Israeli. Israel's not perfect and struggles with inherent racism and discrimination. We vehemently oppose these acts whenever and wherever they exist in Israel, and we must do so in order to ensure that progress continues. But Israel remains the only democracy in the Middle East, and it is a democracy for all of its citizens, with voting rights, the right to protest peacefully, an independent judiciary, and freedom of speech, just to name a few. The fight for true equality in Israel has a long and complicated history, just as it does in the West. but the claim of apartheid is baseless. Zionism does not support genocide. We are living through an intensely complex moment in Israeli history. Some in the current coalition government would reject the original values enshrined in Israel's Declaration of Independence, which state clearly that Israel recognizes and supports the multitude of religious and ethnic identities of its citizens, as well as peaceful coexistence. The founding document of the state reads, "The state of Israel will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom and justice and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. And it will guarantee freedom of religion, of conscience, language, education, and culture. And it will safeguard the holy places of all religions." The current war against Hamas in Gaza has become increasingly problematic and traumatic for those of us within and outside of Israel seeking peace. And the war is devastating the Palestinian people who themselves desire freedom from the horror of Hamas, who have little food and safe shelter. It is a tragedy that cannot be overstated. Our Jewish values speak with no ambiguity about what constitutes an unjust and unjustifiable war. And yet the accusation that Zionism equals genocide simply disregards the facts. It ignores the protests. Jews and non-Jews alike, those who gather week after week, using Zionist pride and patriotism to call for an immediate ceasefire and a return of the hostages as a first priority. The accusation of genocide ignores other facts as well. It ignores the devastating attacks of October 7th, which forced Israel into Gaza to root out terrorist cells from within hospitals, underneath residential areas, and deep within terror tunnels far below ground. Hamas is well aware that the Israeli Defense Forces do everything imaginable to avoid targeting civilians. Leaflets are dropped, warnings are given. Hamas knows this, which is why they shield themselves behind civilians in crowded population centers and under schools and hospitals. Zionism was never intended to be the oppressor's tool, but a shield for the persecuted. The establishment of Israel was in part aimed to ensure that never again would Jews be defenseless against the forces of hatred that seek to annihilate us. To betray that founding principle, to inflict on others the very suffering that our ancestors endured, it simply would not be Zionism. It would be a tragic perversion of what the movement stands for. The Jewish imperative is to remember, and in remembering to ensure such suffering never befalls anyone. The images of destruction in Gaza, the immense civilian suffering, and the humanitarian crisis are cause for profound sorrow. They demand a Jewish response rooted in compassion and justice. But this call to action, it does not mean adopting the language of our enemies. To describe the tragic events in Gaza as a genocide is to misrepresent the reality on the ground and to trivialize the very meaning of the term. We must mourn every innocent life lost and hold accountable actions that violate ethical and legal norms. But we must be precise with our language. Our commitment to justice requires both moral clarity and factual accuracy in holding the Israeli government to account when it fails to meet its own ideals. For this strengthens our Zionism, not weakens it. It is not okay to misrepresent Zionism with these claims of colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. It is not okay to hold Israel to a different standard than any other nation as she attempts to defend herself against not only Hamas and Hezbollah, but against the power behind both of those terrorist organizations, Iran. Lest we forget why the Gaza war started in the first place on October 7th, 2023, with the most depraved and incomprehensible attacks on Jews since the creation of the state. Lest we forget the 20 souls we believe are still living, 2 years later remain rotting in captivity, stolen from their loved ones, and dragged into a captivity so debased it defies imagination. We hurt with every hour and every day that passes while their fates remain unknown. We can and we must hold multiple truths together and nuance. We can reject the distorted, damaging, and false claims about our people and Zionism while we criticize and question the Israeli government's tactics in a tragic war. For our Zionism is deeply rooted in the belief that the Jewish people have the right to live as free people in our own land. And at the same time, the Zionist impulse compels us to live our Jewish values, to raise our voices against a government that expresses less and less interest in returning the hostages, ending the war, and time and again acquiesces to ultra-Orthodox and ultra-nationalist parties. These are the challenges facing the Zionist enterprise in the 21st century. Some of them come from within, and many come from the destructive anti-Semitism that paints Zionism as something it is not. Let's clarify what Zionism is. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people have prayed facing Jerusalem. They prayed using the words that someday we would return. For 2,000 years, we faced violence and insecurity, forced into submission by kings and tyrants, confronted by pogroms and expulsions. And the Jewish leaders who met during the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, had a simple idea in mind. They fervently believed that the Jews must return to the homeland they had prayed to for so very long, the ancient homeland where they once flourished. Theodor Herzl, the organizer of the Congress, had witnessed firsthand the scourge of anti-Semitism even in enlightened Europe, and had come to understand that Jews would never be free of it until they could lay claim to their own land and not rely on others for their safety. In 1960, President John F. Kennedy was asked to speak at a gathering of the Zionists of America convention in New York. He shared these words: "I first saw Palestine in 1939. There, the neglect and ruin left by centuries of Ottoman misrule were slowly being transformed by miracles of labor and sacrifice. But Palestine was still a land of promise in 1939, rather than a land of fulfillment. I returned in 1951, just 3 years after the state was established, to see the grandeur of Israel. In 3 years, this new state had opened its doors to 600,000 immigrants and refugees. Even while fighting for its own survival, Israel had given new hope to the persecuted and new dignity to the very pattern of Jewish life. I left with the conviction that the United Nations may have conferred on Israel the credentials of nationhood, but its own idealism and courage, its own sacrifice and generosity had earned the credentials of immortality." This is what Zionism has always stood for. And as American Jews, we simply cannot afford today to take Israel for granted Since its inception, Israel has provided a home now for millions of Jews fleeing persecution from around the world, Holocaust survivors, Jews from Arab countries, those escaping the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia. Jews from over 100 different countries now make up the population, each bringing their own unique history, traditions, and languages. And we call this the ingathering of the exiles, the ultimate expression of the realization of the Zionist dream. We could not possibly imagine a world without Israel, the spiritual center of the Jewish people and its muse. We could not imagine what Judaism might look like were it not for the Israeli artists and musicians, liturgists, philosophers, poets, and playwrights who bring Judaism to life in ways that stream across the Atlantic Ocean back and forth like bright red threads connecting our hearts to one another. Israel may not be able to survive without American Jews, but I am even more confident that American Jewry would not survive without Israel. Zionism was built on a dream that we might be able to revive our identity and our culture, to revive our own language, and to meet the other peoples of the world on equal footing. And we have done those things. To be a Jew today and to feel safe in the world, in America, in Germany, in Argentina, wherever you go, it is to be a Zionist, to share in the dream. It is to feel a deep connection to history, to understand that we are a living page in that history book of the Jewish people. It is to link our own stories to the stories of other Jewish people, just as we do tonight, and to live and breathe as proud Jews because of the dream of Zion. And yes, it is to visit, to support, to help shape Israel to a thriving, democratic, and values-driven country that it can still become. That is our longing. That is the dream of 2,000 years. This is Zionism. Naomi Shemer was an Israeli songwriter and poet, born to Lithuanian Jewish immigrants in Palestine in the 1930s. Her European family was killed in the Holocaust, but Naomi went on to become one of the most famous Israeli singers of all time. And in 1967, just before the 6 Days War, she wrote and performed the song Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold. Jerusalem of gold and of bronze and of light. Behold, I am the violin for your songs. And I come to sing to you today, to adorn you with crowns. I am the smallest of the youngest of your children and its last poet. For your name scorches the lips like the kiss of an angel. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, she is all gold. As the war broke out mere weeks later and the soldiers found themselves reclaiming the Western Wall, which Jews had not laid eye upon in generations, they broke out into her song. After the blowing of a shofar sounded rich and deep through the valley below. For this song captures something ineffable about Zionism. It captures the suffering, the deep longing felt by 100 generations, wanting, wishing, and praying to be free. It weaves together biblical references to our lost city of Zion, God's holy temple. It evokes the book of Lamentations and the Psalms, the prophets, the Talmud, all woven together seamlessly into a single ode to an ancient consciousness that we have never forgotten. In the words of Hatikva, to be a free people in our own land.
שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לך שירייך אני כינור, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לך שירייך אני אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים, קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאהרון המשוררים, כי שמך צורפת השפתיים, כי נשיקת צרף, אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לך שירייך אני כינור, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לך שירייך